shall speak and say to thee, art thou become as weak as we? Art thou become like us? Thy pomp is brought down to Sheol, a noise of thy viols. The worm is spread under thee, the worms they cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, Halel ben Shekar, Lucifer, son of the morning, bright star, son of the dawn. How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nation?
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We are continuing today in the book of Genesis. We have come to chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. And the whole earth was of one language, and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city, and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one. They have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they all may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and begat Arphaxad, 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 35 years, and begat Salah. And Arphaxad lived after begat Salah 403 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years, and begat Eber. And Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Eber lived 34 years, and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years, and begat Reu. And Peleg lived after he begat Reu 209 years, and begat sons and daughters. Reu lived 230 years, and begat Serug. And Serug lived after he begat Serug. And Reu lived after he begat Serug 207 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years, and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 29 years, and begat Terah. And Terah lived after he begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years, and begat sons and daughters. Hold on a second here. And Terah lived 70 years, and begat Abram. Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, the father of Ishkah. But Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Haran were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Moving quickly into chapter 12 and all that. So, I don't know if we'll really get into this stuff with Abram, because we're going to talk about the Tower of Babel. There's so much to be said, really. It's a fascinating thing, because the more I think about it, the deeper it goes. Because there's an interesting, because the Tower of Babel represents something beyond just the event, whatever, literal event you want to ascribe it to. It's one of those things in the Bible that to me doesn't even, it's so true, it doesn't matter if it literally happens, because it literally happens every time it happens, is what I would say. Is that whenever men seek this sort of thing they're doing here, it is inevitable that it will fail. And it's in the Lord is behind it. It's happened before, it will happen again. It's been prophesied. So the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And again, this is probably that which was referred to as far as in the days of Peleg was the earth divided. Because it makes the most sense, because contextually, what earth was divided? Was it the planet Earth divided into the moon and the earth? Or something? What? No, the moon already came. The planet Earth, or divided into continents. I guess some people think that that's what it means. But rather, the earth that was unified, which is all those people who spoke one language. Now, I like to continue considering, linguistically, if there, not linguistically so much as, speculatively, if our understanding of the flood is wrong, meaning if the literal interpretation that we've gotten from Scripture, if that understanding, and it's more local, and also to consider that one of the things that appears to be true about humans on Earth is that you don't always have people living in the same state of development. When the Romans were in the Roman times, there are other more primitive people living side by side with them. Meaning they don't have the same technologies. They don't necessarily work with metals, and so it's my thought. The thought that occurs to me that is all the people that had this knowledge that Noah would have had were all of one. Not just Noah, but they would have. In some of the apocryphal books, it is asserted that that Ham, aside from being, as we discussed last time, having greatly sinned against his father, let's just say, aside from that, the accusation is leveled that he brought the teachings of the Watchers, and which is something also from some of the pseudepigraphal and the apocryphal literature, and the Jewish mystical stuff. Sometime we may go through that. I was looking at that, and since they have it online and stuff, and it's all digitized, it'd be very easy to put it into this format and to just encounter it, and let's just look. This is one of the things I always told people, so what about all these texts? It's maybe when we'll get to those, and we'll look at them and understand why maybe we don't want to put too much credence in them. But Ham supposedly brought the teachings of the Watchers through. Now, it's just because it is apparent from, I believe this is true, that even to this day, we have people living in more almost like a Stone Age level of existence, where they don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't, There's fewer and fewer of that, right? But you can see how like a technologically advanced group of people can very easily, and as has been, dominate a less technologically advanced. You look at what happened in North America, and the Europeans were not, people could say they were technologically more advanced. As far as like they had ships coming over, they had guns, but they traded with the Indians for the guns. And it was also probably for the diseases that they encountered, the European diseases to which they had no, I was always just, to which they had no defenses. That was that was one of the main things that weakened them significantly. And also they had wars with each other, which also weakened them, and then they were left extremely vulnerable. But there was a technological gap. It wasn't just weapons. It was communications, writings. The Cherokees developed a writing system, but that was during the period of colonization, in a desperate attempt to be, that was before the Trail of Tears, to try to be regarded as civilized as it was seen. And all those terrible facts of history, but it amounts to the same thing. It's like when you have a more, you can have a more dominance, then they can just run roughshod over everything. And that's like what we see today with this tech stuff. People want to be able to control this new world that people are going to inhabit, that they're already inhabiting. And what is said, what is thought. They want to direct everything. They want to find a way to unify and to make everyone into one again. And you see that in the book of Revelation, that there's another attempt to like build the Tower of Babel. And that is represented by the beast, actually. And the beast, you notice, has 7 heads and 10 horns. Because like efforts like this tower, when you try to build your way to heaven, like that's why I played Isaiah 14 at the beginning, because the attempt to ascend into heaven. Let us build a tower whose top may reach into heaven, to make ourselves a name. Like Nimrod, a hunter before the Lord. He stands before the Lord on his own merit, because he's such a damned good hunter, or whatever. I don't know what it is. Sometimes people become so enamored and worshipful of the work of their own hands. Maybe that represents the first aspect of idolatry, because we have gods of the hunt, right? And they're likened unto men, corruptible. That's why the gods of the heathen are these corruptible and corrupt creatures. They're not even really exactly creators. Like Zeus doesn't create the world. They have creative powers though, right? Doesn't like he has a headache and out of it spawns Athena. But so they have so that idea, and they want to elevate themselves also. Today we have these transhumanists in that World Economic Forum and all that stuff and all those conspiracies, but they have ideas about what they want the future to look like. The idea that people aren't conspiring about the future. I'm conspiring about the future. I'm involved in a massive conspiracy with Jesus Christ. He's, I'm with a foreign power, in that sense. But that's never been considered a truly foreign power, because why? Because the power of God, it is above and beyond the state. The state is merely a servant of God. And that is how it ought to be. It should serve God, and by serving God, the people. Because that is also how from the Christian perspective, we serve God by serving one another. So also the state should serve our interests, obviously. But it seems like, really? It's like, is that, does it seem so strange? No. The state should serve the planet's interests and kill all the people. How about that? How about a state like that? Is that what the state's purpose is? So as they attempt to do this thing, and I saw that too. Well, as they try, and what this gives me is comfort. And same thing with the nature of the beast, the seven-headed beast. Oh, so hard to, no wonder one of those heads gets wounded. He's vulnerable, and that's why but he makes war with the saints and overcomes them, so there's that. I don't like, well, whatever, it's like when you're going into a match where you're going to get your rear end kicked, you still go, I go in like I'm going to win. I go in swinging. I think that's the proper attitude. It's like, yeah, I know you're supposed to win. Whatever, maybe not, huh? Maybe I'll make you scared before you win. Maybe I'll make you fear for your life before you win. As far as fear you're not going to win, I should say. I'm thinking in metaphors to the beast. Because this is a representation of that kind of beast, of the coming together of the entire world into this multi-headed kind of thing. Because there's no obvious leader here. Notice, let's just let us do this, make a name for us. Because together they see they have power and they can. Rule doesn't have to, it can emerge into some kind of dictatorship. And often does. And in fact, but the Lord does not allow, at this point he does not, because there's such a concentration of power, apparently. That's why I figure, because suddenly they construct cities. Again. They said, let's make a city and let's put all our efforts together. And what I'm saying is, if you have one, now imagine you have the world now, and there's only one group of techno. When in the days of Cain, there was all this, Cain and Adam, this obvious competition, and not Cain and Adam per se, but the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Adam and the descendants of Seth and all the other unnamed descendants. Like I said, there was a whole other world of which we know precious little. But if if you think about it, the antediluvian fathers, they were extremely long-lived. And they also presumably beget children for much longer than we do. And do we also presume, which I think we ought to, in Sarai, carries some of the residual vigor of the early man? She is able to conceive at 90 or something. I forgot the exact age, but she's quite old. Absurdly old. For most of us. Like 90, like a man you could believe could father a child at 90. We all are, would properly appreciate the vigor that would represent in a man, because often men do not, the desire does fail. But he's usually biologically capable. Doesn't require pills or anything. Women, not so much. Because they go through menopause. And they stop ovulating. But what about in the antediluvian period? Were the women much more fertile? Did they have much, their sorrow and childbearing was still there. It still was painful, right? It wasn't like easier. So as they spit them out it's no easier. Children still need to be raised. And that takes a lot of a woman's attention. For the early period of it anyways, right? So there was a lot more people, but I would think that fertility for your lifetime. How many descendants did Adam have? Direct descendants, or any of those people. Noah, would he have had sons? He brought his wife through the flood. Are these all his descendants? That's another question I always have, is like, are those all the descendants? But in the land of Shinar, again, that's the home of Babylon. This is the origin of Babylon, the origin story, and the idea, and of the name Babel, which means confusion, because their God confused their languages. But I see that it gives me comfort, as I said before, to know this story of what happened when men tried to, like I said, when you have one technologically advanced civilization, you could just totally dominate everything. America almost accomplished that when we won World War II, except the Soviet Union was there and kind of counterbalanced it. And by the time they failed, the world was already kind of more balanced anyways, a bit. I mean, not exactly, right? Okay, I know. America's been on top for a long time. But still, not completely, and also because it wasn't completely malevolent. I'm not saying America doesn't do things that are downright murderous around the world. Sometimes it ought not to be done. That happens. But all of it, all in all, though we are not God, we do it through good intentions. And when God has good intentions, it's good because his plans are good and they work out for all things working out for good for those who are called, in any case, but according to his plan, according to his purpose. But when they try to do this thing, to bring the world together into one, it's destined for failure. Maybe that's what the deadly wound represents. The fact that, you're not going to be able to pull it off. Because even when you all speak the same language, as they try to build this Tower of Babel, into this one world system of belief and stuff, the problem is, after a while, people can't understand each other. And I would put it to if you want to talk to someone, it can supersede the language. I know that it's about the language, sure, but it goes beyond language sometimes. Because you think about the way that they have the political teams. And people may think I'm on one team. Most of my life, I've voted independently of any team. I voted a particular way because I thought it was a good way to vote because of the direction I thought the country should take. Sometimes I wonder about those who say we shouldn't vote. Interesting. There's an interesting thought process behind it. Some people don't. If you do, you should take thought, right? We all take thought. But I don't vote one way or the other because of team. Because of I see myself on one side. It's because I try to look at things honestly. I try to understand people. You know what I mean? But sometimes when you get in a particular mindset of a goal, for example, during the pandemic, they set up, the goal was to stop the spread. This is what we got to do to stop the spread. Everybody get on board. And then even though it obviously didn't work, they kept lying and saying it was working. Even though there was never any evidence for the remedies they proposed, they said there was evidence, and they lied. They call it science, but they just meant this is something plausible we're going to push on you. Seems good to us, and we're smart. Well, then some people, they go along with the project. We're building the tower. Building the tower. We're going to reach to heaven. We're going to get to heaven. We're going to have paradise. We're going to beat the virus. But when you try to talk to them about, maybe it's not such a good idea to build the tower. They're like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it's like trying to talk sense to people when they're engaged in something that is ultimately self-destructive. That is not good. But they think it will be good. Because we've got to take all this power to us. We can save the world. There'd be nothing impossible to us. If only we had the power. like that Klaus Schwab. We only lack the will. We have the money. We only lack the will to make the world a perfect heavenly place. They think they can, if only they just unite their efforts, they can, and if you would just cooperate. But as they build this descent, right, and people realize, no, it's not going to work, but the madness continues. Eventually, God himself steps in this case, anyway. In small ways, does God step in every time? No, but it's a destructive process. It is not for man to ascend into heaven to stand before God. It is not for man to exalt himself above each other. The Lord himself came with the example of humility, and washed the feet of his disciples and told us to do likewise. But men want to build towers and stand on them and look over everybody and say, this is what you've got to do. Do what I say, and then everything will be perfect. For me, that's what it always ends up. Those kind of structures serve those that rise to the top, that stand atop them. They don't serve us. They serve the whole, because there's only room at the top of the tower for one. There's only room at the top for one. Once you go, those step towers represent that. Food pyramids, everything, all of those pyramids. Those pyramids represent, they look a lot like those bell curves, There's a lot in the middle holding up what's up on top. Excuse me. Actually, you'd have to turn the bell curve on its side to really understand what I mean. And then mirror it. But it's like like an inversion of that. But people get roped into it. Oh, let's do it. Let's all build, let's make brick. Let's burn them thoroughly. Let's all do this. They didn't use stone. Because it's interesting. Very interesting. Because the advent of pottery is a very specific time archaeologically, from what I know, that from earlier than like a certain point, you don't find pottery. It's all called pre-pottery. Like at Göbekli Tepe, there is no pottery. In fact, one of the most remarkable things you will find about Egypt, if you start looking into Egypt's like beyond like the standard stuff, but I mean, this is no mystery. I mean, there are numerous carved stone jars from the pre-dynastic period. Well, they call them first dynasty and stuff because they're claimed to that period. But the thing is, they found caches like in underground caves of these magnificent symmetrical stone jars that are carved out of very hard stone and look like they've been turned on lathes. But many of them have things like, if you were turning something on a lathe and know anything about lathes, you'd be like, this part wasn't done on a lathe. They would have had to do this, and they had to be made by very complicated processes because they're incredibly precise, right? And they're stone, all right? Then later on, the Egyptians carve things out of stone too, but they use much softer stone, and the work is inferior. They carve it out of alabaster, which is much easier to work with if you want to carve a jar. But those pre-dynastic, they find them stacked by their tens of thousands in caves. They found these things, these little stone, like they were. And what that says, that implies that they were just mass produced, and it's like Tupperware. Like, who cares? A bunch of stone jars. Point is, they were making magnificent stone jars before they made pottery. Like, meaning where you bake bricks and where they understood to bake clay into pot. They've never found any, let's put it that way, right? They've never found any that old. And in fact, in Egypt, eventually what happens before pottery, they have everything's made out of stone. But if you look into those stone, if you look for things, looking on precision manufactured jars, ancient Egypt, if you look into videos on that, you'll see some amazing things. And this was done in the pre-dynastic period when it was all stone. So here they use brick. And what I'm asserting is that a lot of the antediluvian, what could be antediluvian, let's say, the lost civilization type stuff from a lot of that stuff was definitely made out of stone. Though, when I was watching a lot of this really, the big stuff at the bottom of all the of all the constructions and all over the world, where it's like unevenly constructed, and it's like these amazing. I'm gonna get some pictures and put them up next time when we go. First time we go down to Egypt with Abraham, I'll put in what some of the stuff he might have seen. And what I'm saying is like those. There was a higher technology. There were people who knew how to use it. And I think that there was, like I said, not necessarily our tech by any means. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But because no one really knows how a lot of these things were made. There's some things that just, we just don't know. We don't know we know how we might do, but we don't know how they might do that. And even when it says brick for stone, one of the things that occurred to me, I'm like, what if they had they call it, there's like, oh, this is andesite. Extremely hard, carved out of solid andesite. Now, where they know where the quarry is, then it's obvious. And I think in a lot of things they do know where the quarry is. But I wondered to myself if maybe there were other kinds of rocks that could be poured or made like bricks or baked even. But I think that would be obvious. I mean, or maybe they call it that. Maybe it's being called that because they didn't understand the process. I mean, when it was recorded, what happened at Babel, they don't understand what they were doing at Babel. But they know what happened at Babel. I don't know. So I don't know, maybe is it like just normal clay brick? Slime they had for mortar. Brick for stone, slime for mortar. So it sounds like brick and mortar, A city and a tower that goes up into the heavens. Make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. And the thing is, when he divides them up, it ensures now we have competition. No one's going to reign over everybody. There would be no, though there are, kingdoms that rise to rule over much of the world. Time and time again, bigger ones come from outside or new threats rise over time. And men cannot, the things that we have achieved through cooperation and through greater cooperation, you think about a lot of the scientific advancements that are made, a lot of it is through international cooperation, communication. It's essential. You want to do something big, communicate, right? But what are you trying to do? What are you conspiring to do? It's when people communicated to try to discover how to cure bacterial infections. Again, it was discovered by one person in particular. Was it Salk? Penicillin? I forget. Penicillin, but whatever. Was it under Salk? I think so. Or was that the polio vaccine? I forget. So whatever. I'm not, I don't remember everything. Sorry. But there are things that people have collaborated for good. And some people, again, I said vaccine, and people are like, yeah, vaccines. The point is they intended good, at least in the original. I mean, maybe when they're administering them now, they've put additives or whatever. I don't believe this, but people tell me, oh, there's this and that and that and that. There's mercury in there. Now, maybe I don't know if there is or is not in any particular thing. In whatever thing you're taking, you should know what's in it. I mean, I got all my shots when I was a kid. So I didn't have any say about it. I don't know. And definitely inform yourself. Everything should be informed consent. You should know what you're taking or what you're giving your kids. That's for sure. But anyways, people can communicate, and it can be for good. And the Lord may bless our endeavors. We can work together to, say, let's build a city and feed everyone, or so. What let's do something to better the lot of humanity. But rather, they're thinking about they're bettering the lot of humanity, but not really. Like I said, it's to make a name. Let us take power. Let's build a city and put a tower in, and we'll work together, and we will dominate the world. That's what it sounds like to me. Because again, like I said, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, Peleg in Peleg's day, right? So we're removed from, if Peleg is the time when Babel happens, well then, we're talking, I don't know the exact amount of time. We could add these up, but I'm not in the habit of doing that. We're talking about, but several generations, certainly, will have to have been born. Right? And so the degree to which they are unified is not necessarily clear. A lot of people could be off. Like the descendants aren't all necessarily taking part in this. I don't know. But again, like I said, if there were, because I start thinking about other languages, other people. When I think about the idea of other people, I always think about where do the Neanderthals and the Denisovans fit in? You say, well, do those people really exist? Are they really people? I tend to think a lot of the things they present to us as being ancestors are actually apes, but other things like Neanderthals, they seem to be pretty much human, though very distinct, right? I mean, I don't know if it's possible to tell the race of a person from their skull. And it's sort of odd to me that when they talk about Neanderthal DNA and stuff, that's fascinating because where do they get this stuff? I shouldn't talk about it because I don't know. But the fact that there are sort of distinct lines is kind of interesting, isn't it? What does that represent? I don't know. But I do like to think about it from time to time, and at some point maybe I'll make a deeper study on that. Just on my own, just for my own information. But when people engage to take on to themselves a certain aspect, for the glory of whatever, it's I don't know if it's the motivation. Or just, it's got to be, that has to be a part of it. Not just the motivation. I mean, obviously, it's also the goal. What are you looking for and why do you want it? And it's this phrase, I guess you could look at that, it sounds almost as if God's afraid, right? No, it's just that he does not want, it's against his will. He does not will it. So will not allow it. Will not allow them to do this thing that they want to do. And maybe perhaps that's what the world was like before the flood. They were all building cities here and there. And I don't know if I tend to think there was a lot of conflict. You just look at Cain and then Lamech starts talking about, hey, listen, I killed a man who hurt me. There's killing going on. Obviously, there's a lot of, the world is filled with violence, as it says. Let us go down. I like it says, they say, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach to heaven. And the Lord says, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech, and so they be scattered. So they would be scattered, and their inability to talk to each other. And I do think that also, like I said, I think there's also a natural built-in thing, at least not of necessity. You can get a cult-like mentality and get people to march to whatever beat you want once you got the right people. You know what I mean? And I don't know. So throughout history, we've seen people who are able to sort of marshal that power structure and tried to do whatever they want, essentially. Like that's what Adolf Hitler did. He did whatever he wanted. You know, I'll round up the Jews and put them in box cars and ship them off to gas chambers. Some people don't believe that happened. That's pretty astonishing, actually. It's all made up. It's like, oh gosh, you know, I understand. Maybe it's exaggerated. Maybe it's a little exaggerated. Because it's hard to tell sometimes, you know, but it's like, there's a lot of records and stuff that have been gone over. All right, there's a lot of piles of, a lot of people got killed, and the fact of just the whole people that died in the horrors of the war. I mean, that amount of death outweighs even what was done. I mean, that's awful to just kill regular people, but regular people also fight the war, and that's all awful. But you see what happens when people can get all people of one language, German, to all listen and sort of, let's build a tower, let's exalt ourselves to heaven, like Satan, like the men at the Tower of Babel. Let's go to heaven, buddies. We're going there. We're going to be right up there with God and right next to Nimrod. We will, you know, we'll be like the emperors of the world. We will be the emperors of the world. We'll be the emperor. You know, we're the ones who are going to do it because we got the money. Just with the, you know, if you have enough billions, you can just invite world leaders and they'll come. I've got a new idea for ruling the world. Come on, fellas. I'll give you lots of money. Yeah. But like, see, they when they get together, they are unrestrained. You know, human experimentation. They kill. They euthanized the feeble-minded, the cripples. You know, they only wanted the healthiest, the fittest, because we only have those. We only want those who are worthy. And ultimately, they were defeated. But you see, like, if there wasn't some counterbalancing other people who had another language to stop them, what would be restrained from them? Imagine if Germany was the only people who had airplanes and tanks in World War II. You know? Imagine if the rest of the world was like Poland, still had horse cavalry because they hadn't. You know, they hadn't upgraded, and then it was a short time between World War I and World War II. And, you know, cavalry was a long, traditional way of fighting war. But they found themselves outmatched technologically. Like I said, people that build cities are not people that, you know, follow sheep around. You know? You know, when you follow sheep around, you're usually not, you know, you build a hut maybe. You follow the sheep. And we see that with Abraham and his descendants. They seem to be herdsmen, you know. It seems to be his primary occupation. He's not about, though they dwell in cities and around city areas. Haran, I don't know if that's a region. I think that is a region, actually, the way it's described, because it is named after a man. And it didn't mention that he built a city and named it after himself, you know. Haran probably refers to the region. So that's just my assessment on the face of it. I haven't gone for certain, you haven't gone into a dictionary or anything. Okay. So we confounded their language. They do not understand one another's speech. Like I said, on the surface, very easy to understand, like, okay, the idea that's how. Now, is that the idea how language was created? Well, there was language prior to that, of course. Were there other languages, though? Was there ever another language? Well, here's the thing. In the antediluvian period, there could have been many languages. Right? They could have developed. And I would suggest they probably did develop because of the treacherous and wicked nature of man in that time. People would... Not that we've changed, but people would want to have their own language so we could talk to each other, and so you don't understand us, you know, because it's part of the idea of we want to conceal what we're doing. We want to conceal our communications. First thing we do is come up with codes and different ways of speaking. We start saying things different. And when we become isolated, we also become, over time, our speech has a way of changing. I mean, just look at Old English compared to modern English. And I don't mean the King James English. That is modern English. I mean, like Chaucer. If you've ever read Chaucer in high school, you may have had to. I mean, it's just almost it's barely intelligible. And it is actually unintelligible without some sort of key on certain words and phrases. There are parts of it you will not understand. I know I didn't, and I wouldn't if I read them again and couldn't remember what that meant. There are just some very different ways of speaking and stuff that was common in English back then. And that's, I think, what was that, like 1500s, 1600s? But, that's Old English. They didn't speak English like we do now. So in the antediluvian period, there could be multiple languages. And but as far as the people who came through the flood with Noah, among them, there would be one speech, of course. So that of course, and that's why I say, like, if the flood is not completely global, but rather, eventually they would encounter other people who were living primitively. And because perhaps, like I said, the purpose of the flood was to destroy the world, so to speak. What was the order of the world? Just like at the end of this age, the world as we know it is going to be gone. Like this technological civilization we live in, I do not believe will exist in the millennium in which Christ lives. I don't know if we're going to live like, Bronze Age shepherds or something like that. I don't think so, but it's going to be very different because, one, we're going to have a return of the sons of God. Not the ones that are reserved in chains and darkness. Not even really a return. Well, I'm saying a return of the terms. I mean, we'll have sons of God here again, but not the ones from before. Now there will be new sons of God on the earth. There will be new sons of God, basically newly minted sons of God. Newly resurrected, but present on earth with Christ. So you can imagine that world is going to be very different technologically even from this world, because I don't know what that means. It's like, well, what does that mean? We'll start, building with giant stones again? It's like, here, I'll levitate the giant stone over there. I don't, who knows? Who knows what kind of power and stuff will be available at that time? But I think there's some remnant of understanding left among the sons of Noah, because they lived there, and Ham shows he is an immoral. You don't need Cain. By the way, the seed of the serpent is alive in Ham. I think that's obvious, because who told him to go in to his father's wife? Who told him? Who told you that you were naked? Did you eat of the tree? It's the same question you should ask. Who told him? Where'd you get the idea? The serpent's seed had been sown in the heart of Ham. I should have mentioned that. You don't need to bring Cain as far as... First of all, don't bring anyone else on the ark. It says 12 souls were on the ark. 8, 12. I just get it totally wrong. 8 souls on the ark. That means 8 humans. I don't want any subhumans. I don't want any superhumans. There are just 8 human souls on the ark. That's it. Those are the ones that were saved using the ark. Like I said, if there's any remnants or anything like that of primitive whatever elsewhere, it's like the civilization was wiped out completely otherwise. With remnant, but here's, I don't know. Well, as far as, the wickedness that was gone. Like I said, there may be like giant stones left over and stuff like that. Stuff buried under the sea and stuff like that. Like the Bimini Road or who knows, left from that time. There's other places. Like, there's a place on Malta. Was it Malta or was it Malta? Yeah, there's like structures that go down into, these are islands, but they were once the tops of mountains, interconnected, and not underwater. A lot of the old world and a lot of the old mountains are underwater. And that's another thing is, I don't know. Well, that is manifest. I mean, we know the sea levels are not what they used to be. They used to be much lower. And then, that was like 12,000 years ago. Or so they say, right? I don't know. I'm not an authority. The name of it is Babel because there the Lord did confound their languages. And it also represents something very key about, God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. Right? It says that. But God does confound their language. They then become confused. So, he doesn't make confusion. They created the circumstances by which that comes about. It's just like the evil of the lake of fire. It's like, is that God's? No, it's like you. The lake of fire is the second death. It is a metaphor for the utter destruction that comes about, that must come about, ultimately. There's no, like the reason we talk about resurrection and the white throne is so people know, like, whatever you think about the afterlife is coming to an end if you don't get right with God. Whatever your afterlife you think is going to happen is not going to be what you think. You're going to be judged. You're going to be judged. And so the question is, what will you do about it? It's like, and what to do about it? You come to Christ. That's what you do. That's what you should do. But, that desire to ascend into heaven, the desire to unify for that effort among men. Satan goes on his own. Nimrod goes on his own. But then there's the impulse, like, let's work together. But always in the midst of that, eventually, like I said, as you just like with Rome, they start off, we'll do a republic. Even in our country, we're treading precariously close to destruction because we've granted so much power to the executive branch, it's getting out of control. And, people, they used to run on, we're going to go in and rein in Washington. One of these days, Washington's going to say no. They're just going to say no. They're going to say, no, keep your representatives. We don't want to be reined in. Your local commissar will tell you what to do. Yeah. So sorry, I just can't get that last bit of whatever cold I have is like hanging out at the very top of my throat. I can cough and then I'll be able to sing and stuff, but as I talk, it just keeps collecting there. All right. Lovely. And so then we get to the generations of Shem. I don't know if there's much more to say about the Tower of Babel. I mean, like I said, I compare it to that. We see the comparison from Revelation, like as far as, the beast. Because most creatures rise, just like the statue of Nebuchadnezzar also. It rises right to that head of gold. But down beneath, the feet of clay make it weak. It's a little inverse, because I look at the beast, it's on the sea, which is the people. That's the big base, right? The dragon rides upon, it's on the sea, the multitudes and kindreds and tongues and nations. The woman rides the beast again, but his heads are divided. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. There are 7 kings, 5 are fallen. There's a lot you could say about that in the specifics and speculation, but just the motif of the tower. The simple structure. Up, 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 up. And, I mentioned a step tower. It doesn't specify that. but the idea of building something whose pinnacle reaches to heaven, the idea of having a pinnacle or a tower implies that it is a point rising in the sky. Not a general, we're not going to elevate a platform into heaven. No, we're going to put a spire. A tower. How big is that tower? How many people can stand on top of that tower at the same time? Not many. Not many. We know how those things end up. They either fall apart, like I remember my dad teaching me, he was like, direct democracy ends in chaos. Because direct democracy just doesn't. If you have too much, you can't just let everybody vote. Apparently, like on everything. One, it's too much. Not everyone has enough information. You should have people specialize and get the information, and you should elect the best people to make decisions. People don't like that. Everyone should just decide on everything. We have direct democracy. We'll never get anywhere with that. And if we try to get anywhere, we'll start squabbling among ourselves. We'll never agree. Too much bottom control results in inaction. You have to have somebody in charge in some degree. That's why even in the church, he's appointed some prophets, some apostles, some pastors, some teachers. There's one head, even Christ, but from it there's other members, and we have authority as the Spirit gives us. And the authority comes from God, and the way it's manifested is like when I say something and it's in your heart, like that's true. That's authority speaking. Not that I have it, but the Holy Spirit testifies to it, of what's good, what you should put weight in. Because I say a lot of things that, as you know, I would not have you put weight on. I try to make that very clear. So we have this generations of Shem, right? Shem, Arphaxad, Salah. And we talked about how there's really a missing grandson between Arphaxad and Salah. Now, according to the Septuagint. And I presume it also has an age there. I have a copy of the Septuagint somewhere. Actually, I didn't actually bring it out for this, and I'm sorry I didn't, but it's okay. Because like I said, this kind of stuff is just things you can look for. There's certain kind of research that's very easily done just by, you want to find that out. You don't need me to think of something for you. It's just factual information you can find out. But that would somewhat change the timeline. But again, I'm not really worried about timelines because it's like, I don't know. It's interesting. Their lifespans begin decreasing. As it said at the beginning of the flood, that his days would be 120 years. And then men start having short lifespans that are within that range. But what I find fascinating about that whole thing and the lifespans thing, and I think I mentioned this, but I want to say, I'll talk about it a little more, I guess. It's just that, we find it astonishing when someone lives to be 120. And we live in this modern technological age where we got medicine and we think we know about germs and bacteria. When I was 17, I got a bacterial infection in my arm that I didn't do anything about, that began to take over my entire arm until my entire arm was sore. And I was feeling like I was going to pass out. At which point, back then, that's when you went to the emergency room, was when you're like, I got like a football-sized... It wasn't that. It was like... it would be like if you took your fist and you opened it up and put it on your arm. It was like, that's about how big it was on my elbow here. On my, I usually have my right arm because I remember it wasn't on my arm with the scars. It was on my right arm. Hurt like the dickens. It started off with like a mosquito bite. I scratched it, but then it got infected. It was cellulitis, right? And my skin was like jelly, and it grew to the size of a nickel, and then it grew to the size of, like I showed you, like about my hand covering my arm. And by then it was painful. I couldn't move it. And I remember I was at a bar. I was a teenager, but it was an all ages night. I was with my friend, and I remember saying, I was just like, oh, I don't feel good. I'm like, would you guys drop? And they dropped me off at the hospital. They gave me penicillin or whatever, antibiotics through intravenously. And they're like, boy, it's a good thing you came in because you could have died. I was like, wow, I had never imagined it, right? Like I said, I was sick as a dog when I was like, I remember laying with my stomach clenching and like, boy, if my kid was like that, I'd be like, should I go to the emergency? But again, I'm scarred because my oldest, when he was young, I did have to rush him to the emergency room. And at the time, I was reluctant. And I felt, and like running in with a lifeless child has a way of affecting you forever after. It's like traumatic stress. I've got a bit of that on a few fronts, actually. I've been through a few things, I can say. So I've been there at 3 a.m. when the doctor tells you that the next operation could kill your child. That kind of stuff. So I've been there. Didn't lose the child, though, so I'm thankful. But being confronted with the possibility, oh well. I mean, as far as like, when I say oh well, what I'm thinking in my heart is that like, life is good. God is good to me, and life has been relatively easy. But I do try to take the lessons I've been given and make the most of them and understand them. Lest the Lord have to put a harder thing on me. I don't want to be like Job. Not that I mean, I love Job. I don't want to be critical of Job, but I don't want to. I think one Job is enough to learn. Naked I came into the world, and naked I go out, and boy, God is good to me. In between, right? He sure is good to me in between. That's why, when I go out of the world naked, I know one thing I will be clothed with before God, and that is the righteousness of Christ. So, I think I'm standing pretty good on that one as far as me personally. But, again, the right attitude. I know that righteousness where it comes from. I am not the mighty hunter. I'm not the hunter that gets his name up there in front of God on the wall or something. I don't know. Like I keep referring to that because I'm not sure what it means, but I think it means something like that, right? Okay, so we had that one descendant missing in there. Again, like to me, that just says there could be a lot of... Like I said, I was thinking about it, like I've been saying, I think the flood account is Noah's account. And all that. And I don't know about the Genesis story. A lot of it I don't know. I do understand, though, that the books of Genesis, Exodus, that the 5 books are considered the books of Moses by the Jews and are referred to as such in the New Testament. Though, you could say it's written in Moses, though, and it does not of necessity mean that everything in Moses was penned by Moses. Per se, meaning he could have, as some affirm also, that he could have compiled parts of it. Because again, like the account of Abraham and that we're about to learn about in Genesis, parts could have come from oral traditions that go back to Noah. Because remember, this is a family tradition. They trace their ancestry back to Adam. And I do think that those names are something very ancient. They represent a very ancient oral tradition that is way before Moses. The idea that, they always want to say, oh, it happened in Babylon. Because they just don't, the idea of Moses having anything to do with that. The idea that Babylon, they came up with all this imaginary history is ridiculous. It really is. I think it is, that they just came up with all this out of whole cloth. They had no source material. Now, they think that maybe they pieced it together there. I'll tell you what. At Babylon, I admit there is a possibility of editing. And I think that's where a lot of the things that I complain about may have been done. Because perhaps because of neglect, the books of Moses in some way were in somewhat of a disrepair. Because there may not have been a lot of copies because the children of Israel were whoring after idols all the time. And then they were being invaded. Now, God preserved the word, of course. We have it. And it is intact. But I do think, when I think of inspiration, I think of this. I have long time holden my peace. I have been still and refrained myself. Now I will cry like a woman in labor. I will destroy and devour at once. Like that one requires inspiration. To know that requires that you be inspired by God. Now you could make it up, but the point is you're thinking about God. You have to be inspired in some way to even say such a thing. Just like no man can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit, because on some level you can't confess that without the Spirit enlightening you to it. And what was I saying? Oh, and I'm sorry. She muted the thing. So let me just one second. Let me just mute it here. My apologies. I think it's much better. Okay. Apparently, the morning had to fully work. You know, I would say I should warm up by talking for an hour before I do the Bible study, right? I'm so sorry. You know, it used to be that I did that, just let it go. But the muting, I think you can all appreciate it. All right. Here we go. We got the sound on. Good. All right. We were talking about the genealogies. Abraham. Oh, and the remarkable thing about those ages. Yeah. It's just like what I'm saying is not just the fact that they lived long. That's not the point. This is the point I've been trying to get at. Why did he live why 120? Why is that actually kind of the upper limit? Why did they know that? Why are we always told that people in ancient times died at 30 all the time? That was my point about the story in the hospital. I could have died at 17 in the modern age. In the modern age, I was almost dead. We needed penicillin to save my life. And I know everyone didn't live to be 800, right? Abel didn't. When people died by being killed, there was also beasts going after people, right? God already promised that. Men kill men, beasts kill men. The tiniest creatures can kill men, even little bacteria, right? Yet, men, at the time, when this was written, you know, you think about the Septuagint, the older version probably, had the antediluvian patriarchs, like he had Seth when he was 130 something. You know what I mean? It's like, what? Why? What was he doing for the first 100 years? Just courting? Hey, Eve. How about next week? How about next year? How about next century, huh? How about we get started on that whole be fruitful and multiply thing? Why am I waiting 135 years to have a son? Why indeed? Like, I always find it interesting, uncomfortable or difficult texts in the Bible are great, actually, because I can't imagine why people would put them in there. So they're either the result of some sort of error, or sometimes it's so obviously not an error. It's not like a misprint or a miscopy. It's just like, this is a fact of the scriptures. Like, this is what it says. Like it or not. And yeah, the patriarchs lived 900 years, 800 years, and had children very late in life. Started late, quote unquote, started. It's like I said, you know, it's like, you know, you think about it though. What if like, now here they're living 30 years and they're having kids, right? Period prior to the flood, and we talked about this thing from the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, many of the patriarchs start having kids later. In the Masoretic text, not so much. But like some of them still have this odd, very late start that we can observe, right? Like Enoch he was 65 before he had his firstborn Methuselah. We assume firstborn. You know, I mean, like I said, if you take this too literally, then that was his only child. Well, no one else is listed. We got to be silent when the Bible is silent, right? Jared lived 162 years before he begat Enoch. 162. And by the way, in the Septuagint, Enoch lived 165. Mahalalel lived 65. In the Septuagint, 165. But even 65. He's begetting Jared, who we presume, well, who we will not presume, who we will say is the heir, the promised heir. Now, I don't know if that means Jared was a good guy or Mahaliel. Right? We don't know. I don't think it says much about them morally. I mean, because the reason they could be listed is because they were the descendants or the predecessors, I should say, the ancestors of Noah. And he was definitely the heir because to him was given the ark to build and to live in and survive, to be saved by, which is a picture of salvation through Christ, of course. You know, he is the ark to which we enter and we are saved, us and all our house and our family. If we will abide, you know, but even so, those they came through, though they were all went through, all came through the sea with Moses, all rode on the ark with Noah, yet Ham was wicked. And his son inherited a curse from his father. At least, does God have to honor Noah's curse? I don't know. But Noah is a righteous man, in some ways maybe a prophet. And in some ways, like I said, Canaan ain't going to help but be cursed. How could he not be cursed? He's the product. If he's the product of that union, it's like being a bastard in the old days when it mattered. Not having a father. You don't have a father. Your dad did not. There's no man who will put his name on you. Too embarrassed. And what a slut your mother is for just sleeping with a guy who wouldn't marry her. It's like that back then. That was bad. Still is. Bad for the kids, bad for you, bad for the husband. Not husband, I mean the father. Maybe good for him fiscally and all that. Yeah, sure, you live a life, but morally you're reaping a harvest of corruption. So, in the after the flood period, the post-deluge period, lifespans begin shortening precipitously until generations are born that do not live past 120 years or so. I don't know. Some people have claimed to be a little older. I don't think it's a hard limit, but it's just like that. You could say 1,000 years in the old days, right? When Adam lived to be 800 or whatever. These men lived very long times. But like I said, it's like, I don't think that's meant to be a fairy tale for children. I think that the Masoretes were somewhat embarrassed. And that's why they thought, maybe these ones don't belong here. Now, that's not how it works in Hebrew. They don't have a one in front of the text like 50, like 165. 65 becomes 165 by the addition of a one. That's not how that's not their numbering system. What is their numbering system? That's a good question. I should look at that, actually. Let's look at that right now. Let's see what it says when they have a number for the ages. It's funny. I've never bothered to do this. I think in all my time studying, I don't think I ever checked. Or I must have, and I probably found not much there maybe, huh? Let's look at 100 years old. Oh, I want something 5 and 30. Okay, so obviously they have different words for it. 5 and 30. Let's just see. 430 years. Okay, so we have 4. Arba, it's the number 4. Oh, so they say the word 4. Okay, that's good. 30. Oh, so it's a separate word. Like I said, how do I know it didn't say 4, 30, 100, and 1,000 years? And then after a while, someone was like, are we sure about that 1,000? How do I know? Because they started taking 100 off. Are we sure that belongs in the text? That 100. Are we sure any of these dates belong in the text? I don't know. And like I was saying before, when I think of what's inspired, I think, I, the Lord, say these things. You need to be inspired to say that. Otherwise, you're falsely speaking in the name of the Lord, right? You're a false prophet. But if I say to you, in the 3rd day of the 5th month, on the 6th year, so-and-so went forth to make war against so-and-so. Now, I could be totally ignorant of those events. And God could tell me what happened. And I might write like hundreds of years later. But honestly, I don't think that's how the Bible works. That's not how the New Testament's None of us believes the New Testament was written that way. I don't think God wrote the Old Testament that way either, because God didn't actually write it like in that sense. He inspired it, inspired men to write things that got put into the book. That doesn't mean everything that God put in is of God. Just like when the servant of the Assyrian Rabshakeh says, you will eat your own dung and drink your own piss. That's dutifully reported by the prophet Isaiah, but it is not something I think that was inspired. You know what I mean? It wasn't technically inspired. I mean, it was an inspired bit of, taunting, Has the Lord not sent me to speak to you and to the men on the wall, that they may know that they're going to be eating their own dung and drinking their own piss with you after we get done with you? Because we're going to set siege to your city, and you're going to be sitting there eating your poop because you have no food. You're going to be drinking your urine because we're going to cut off water. That's what he's saying. Again, not only is that not going to happen, so it's a lie. It's a lie that's right there in the Bible. Well, it's a person lying. Again, so it's true. He lied, right? But not every single part of it is directly inspired by God. That man said stuff. Maybe he was in some way, like I said, because the whole world is unfolding after God's plan. You could say in some way that God's responsible for all of it. Of course. But on a certain level. I certain things that we are even cautioned in the New Testament. I don't want to Google. Where's my King James Bible? There we go. Oh, never mind. I was going to bring up another image of Google. I have a tombstone that says Google censorship on it, for a video I'm working on. All right, so no, I went over by 15 minutes. Gosh. All right, so we're going to continue chapter 6 tomorrow. Oh, not 6. What am I talking about? Continue. We're at the end of this chapter. Oh, we're going to continue in this chapter. What verse? But just the part about Abraham. We're down. We'll just start tracing the journey of Abraham in Genesis 11. We'll begin tomorrow. Yeah, but my overall point about that long lifespan is it seems like a weird thing to make up because it's counterintuitive. I said, according to everyone, that nobody lived 120 years. Why is that true? I mean, they're wrong. People do live about 120 years, and they did. I understand that, yes, through infant mortality, and a lot of people do get shorter lives, and through diseases we suffer, our lives are shortened. But how long did man live back then, really, if he was healthy? Apparently a lot longer than we do, I would say, on average. If you don't meet a untimely death through murder or something, if you're eating the good things God has provided for food, you have every expectation to live out 120 years. But we don't. Why is that? That's a good question. Some people, there's a reason I mentioned the food, because I have no doubt that has something to do with it. Shem, Aram, these are 11. Okay, yeah, 11. We're going to pick it up at Peleg, Rusarug, Terah. Oh, we'll pick it up at verse 26. Whatever. Yeah, we'll pick it up at verse 27 tomorrow. So thanks for joining me. We'll be back in tomorrow. Finish out this chapter, get into Abraham, and then next week we'll continue. Thanks for joining me. Until then.
Oh, they shall speak and say to thee, art thou become as weak as we, art thou become like us? Thy pomp is brought down to Sheol, a noise of thy beals. The worm is spread under thee, the worms they cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, Halel ben Shekar, Lucifer, son of the morning, bright star, son of the dawn. How art thou cut down to the ground?